Yep, okay, we gotta go out there and talk about it. The last time, baby, this is it. We will never discuss this topic again. Or, at least in its own video. We'll probably make a few allusions to this over the next few years, but when it comes to one of the biggest potential trade request stories that we had seen out of the Montreal Canadiens this summer, the biggest one by far, aside the Patrick Laine's, aside the Trevor Zegrases, aside the Marty Natchises, and aside the Rutger McGroartys, the biggest name that Canadiens fans were discussing was Kris Letang of the Pittsburgh Penguins. We made a few videos talking about Kris Letang and the Habs because it was reported on Mark Madden's sports talk radio show that Kris Letang apparently had a preference of getting traded to the Montreal Canadiens. This was a pretty big deal, understandably so. I mean, Letang is a really well-established Pittsburgh Penguin. He is a legend in that fan base and the team's history, and he at one point was an absolute top-tier superstar in the league. Not that he's, not good anymore. He's still fantastic. It's just, at a time earlier on in his career, he was considered amongst the premier, the top 4, top 5 defensemen in the league. Kris Letang would always be in that conversation. He's not anymore. But once upon a time, he was. Add to that 3 Stanley Cups, and you have yourselves a guy whom, if he gets linked to the Montreal Canadiens as a Quebecois guy, you know for sure Habs fans are going to eat that up. And as we had said, we made videos about Kris Letang and the Canadiens. We had talked about the initial request, we had talked about the updates, and Kyle Dubas, him wanting to trade Letang, or he maybe wants to, maybe doesn't, who really knows. But we finally have Letang himself speaking out about these trade rumors to the Montreal Canadiens, and I had to go out there and make one more video just putting the nail in the coffin. Take a look at this piece on The Athletic published out there by Rob Rossi. It's right there in the title. What I'm seeing from the Penguins. Did Kris Letang ask for a trade? No, I did not. Article will be linked in the description, but of course it's The Athletic. We're not going to screenshot this piece. Instead, we're going over to a TVA Sports article that goes out there and transcribes the quotes that we need to give the update here. I didn't ask for a trade, Kris Letang says. Both articles, The Athletic and TVA, will be linked in the description. So, take a look at this. The article goes out there and talks about how Sidney Crosby recently signed an extension. And with that confirmed, the Penguins can now focus on preparing for the 24-25 season, and their players, including Kris Letang, say they are very happy to be back at work. In the case of the 37-year-old Quebec defenseman, the question of his desire to stay in Pennsylvania was even more worthy of being asked, because last month, Mark Madden, Pittsburgh journalist, reported that the defenseman had demanded a trade, sending him to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, The Athletic, through Rob Rossi, wanted to get a response from the player concerned, and it was clear and limpid. Kris Letang says about the trade request to Montreal, "People talked about this? They didn't discuss it with me. I didn't ask for a trade," he said bluntly. And so, there you go. That's it. Kris Letang responded to the Mark Madden rumors by saying that his request to be traded wasn't even real. And, I don't want to say oh, I'm disappointed. I personally am ticked off that Kris Letang did not have a desire to come to the Habs. Look, at this point, if anybody's worried about me, the person behind the microphone, please don't do that. I am just a guy reporting about stuff, or not even reporting, that's not even the right word, talking about stuff. That's entirely what this YouTube channel is, just taking a look at what's going on, responding to ideas, and just kind of giving my 2 cents on it. That's kind of why I try not to pretend that I'm some super well-refined and integrity-filled journalist that's always got the scoop or whatever. No, half the videos we talk about, they're all about trade rumors that don't come true. So, while it is, kind of disappointing that this did not actually go down, a Kris Letang trade to Montreal, the fact that he himself went out there and said, yeah, no, I didn't request a trade. What are you talking about? Were you nuts? No one talked about this with me. That's a pretty par-for-the-course response. And even if Kris Letang did go out there and request a trade, and he did have a desire to play back with his hometown Habs, he's not going to go out there and say it, right? So, that sometimes you have to acknowledge that things like this can be like some sort of a Schrodinger's trade request, if you wanted to say that. Whether or not you believe Kris Letang actually requested a trade or not is irrelevant, because he himself is saying that he didn't. Now, is it possible that he is telling the truth and he really didn't? Yeah, that's totally possible. But what else is totally possible is that he did request a trade and he's not going to go out there and admit it publicly. But the fact is, we will never know. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, does it really make a sound? If a journalist says Kris Letang has requested a trade, but the trade never gets made, regardless of what he says, was the trade request really real or fake? Okay, now diverting from the philosophical elements about this idea, the rest of the article does go out there and talk about a few extra things. Letang dismissed any speculation about his hypothetical dissatisfaction with the Pittsburgh Penguins. According to him, it's all false, despite the club's last 2 playoff exclusions. The holder of a contract valued until 2028 does not regret his decision to continue his association with the Penguins, even if the arrival of Erik Karlsson last year took away his position as the main quarterback on the power play. Every year will be different. In the NHL, we always say that a 2-week window can change a lot of things for an organization. That's the way it is. We made changes. It was frustrating for everyone to see that we didn't pick it up last season. At the end, we were 24 hours away from qualifying, and we missed it. Yes, it was frustrating. Now, I think most of y'all remember that the Penguins were in that final last-second effort of making the final wild card in the Eastern Conference last year, only to be spoiled by the Philadelphia Flyers and the Washington Capitals game. The Red Wings were also kind of screwed over by that result, so a lot of teams were in the mix until the very end of it all. Pittsburgh was included in that mix, although, to be fair, the entire division and the way that the Eastern Conference shaped up, a lot of these teams were terrible towards the end and were still fighting for a dying day to live in the playoffs. So, methinks it is kind of meh trying to analyze where exactly this Pittsburgh Penguins team is going to go next season. I mean, they did make some interesting acquisitions, so they definitely do have an opportunity to contend, or even contend just for a wildcard spot. But whether or not that really happens, who knows? The article at the end here ends by talking about Kris Letang's comments on Sidney Crosby and his privilege to play alongside Sid the Kid, who had signed a 2-year extension. In fact, the rearguard believes that if number 87 wants it, he'll be using his talents on the ice for a very long time. He can play until he's 50, Letang said, but at the end of the day, it's still his decision. His body isn't deteriorating. He's relying on the same power, the same strengths, and so on top of that, he's still ahead of everyone because of his head, his mind, his IQ. So even if he starts to slow down one day, he'll still be ahead of everyone because of the way he sees the game. With this in mind, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below on Kris Letang speaking out about the trade rumors to the Montreal Canadiens. He finally goes out there with his comments, dismissing it all and saying it's not real. Does this mean that Letang will end his career with the Penguins? I don't know. I mean, his contract expires in 2027, 2028. He's got a while to go, right? But either way, for now, the Montreal Quebec native will not be heading over to the Montreal Canadiens, and it seems like he did not even request to do so. Whether or not you believe it, that's up to you, but for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Both articles, the Athletic article and the TVA article, will be linked in the description down below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.